Well, basically, my book is my mother's story. My mother is a Gugutha woman who grew up on Kuniba Mission. She's an Aboriginal woman, and it's basically traces her childhood from about the age of 4 through to 13 years old. The book is quite unique in terms of Australian literature because it's written partly in our Aboriginal language, our Gugutha language, and so there's quite an extensive glossary at the front of the book. And the reason why that is because my mother wanted her story told in a way that people reading it would see through her eyes and feel what she felt as a child. In Australia, we have a colonial history, and we have a number of policies that have been very detrimental to our Aboriginal people. Some have said that, certainly here at the festival, here at Bangalore, people have said that, some of our experiences are similar to the Dalit people, and certainly with that colonial history we have many issues. Some even say cultural genocide has taken place as part of those policies. And so my mum grew up on a Christian mission. They basically forbade people to speak their language, and the state had total and complete control over people's lives. People couldn't even marry without permission, and there was a policy of segregation. So this is about speaking back to that colonial history. It's about centering my mother's voice in language as well, and it's about making space, I think, for her story and for our family's story. And it's, like I said, quite unique because there's not too many books in Australia that's written in language, and I know here in India it's enormously important in terms of books being written in language, and especially for Dalit people. So yes, I'm just very excited to be here, and it's a real honour. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, and to be able to share this story with others and to learn so much too in terms of other amazing authors as well, and some who have been peripherised in society as well. So, yeah. Well, it's sort of actually got 3 meanings, and one that you've suggested is correct. Mazin hasn't got a G on the end because in Aboriginal English, often we drop G's on words, and so it is Amazing Grace. It's, Amazing Grace, the song. It's the mission context. But the little girl in the book, although my mother's name is called Mercy, in the book we decided to change all of the names, and so her name is Grace in the book, and she's an amazing little girl in terms of her journey of survival. And she tries to find out the identity of her father. And so she's in a maze trying to do that. So it's actually got 3 levels of meaning. Both the Christian system, which in terms of the mission system was very destructive in many ways culturally. People were not allowed to go and continue their cultural beliefs and their ceremonies, although you'll see in the book that people still did this outside of the knowledge of the missionaries. And language was still spoken. And people often say when they read it, it is written in Aboriginal English and Gugutha. And people say it's very hard to get through the first few chapters, and we say we've made that very deliberate, because for us as Aboriginal people, we speak the language of the coloniser, English. I would prefer to be speaking my language to everybody in Australia. If our rights were honoured, we would have many languages and people would be multilingual. Instead, we have one English language, and that's what we're expected to speak. So this is about centering our voices. This is about bringing us back from the peripheries to the centre in terms of Australian literature and in terms of our positioning and our history. So, and like I said, many parallels to the Dalit people here in India. Yes, Nalgu Wongan Gugutha. Yeah, sometimes. So, I do speak a little bit of language. I'm not fluent like my grandmother was, and my great-grandmother, they could speak fluent, and then there's deeper levels of the language as well, which those who had more cultural knowledge had and more ceremonial knowledge, had the deeper levels of knowledge in the language. I can listen and understand, and I can speak with my mother. Often we might speak in language if we don't want others to know what we're saying, or if there's, it's often contextual, and so, depending on what we're talking about. But I don't have the same handle on the language that my mother does and that my grandmother did. And so that's also something that's enormously important. This book now gets taken out when, we still connect to country, we still have our dreaming belief systems, which is like our religion. We go out and visit our rock holes. We have the Seven Sisters, who are our spiritual ancestors, and they travel across the sky. They're a star constellation, and so when they wake up and when they go to sleep in the night sky, we know that's time to go out and make sure that our rock holes are clean and that we look after that, and that keeps us healthy. So there's a very strong spiritual connection to country, to that connection to our country as well as to language, because that's the context. Yeah, language is culture. This book now gets taken out on those trips, and everybody reads it around the campfire, including the children, and they laugh, and they because they can hear the words in their own language, and they also add to the story. So it's become, I suppose, a book that's allowed cultural revitalisation in many ways, and it's allowed a centering, and it's allowed a voice where we've been silenced before. Yes. Because it's written in Aboriginal English and Gugutha, so you'll see the language is different. It takes a little while to get used to it. I understand everything that's in here. I've learnt a few extra words in the process, and I had to ring aunties and nanas. It's quite a collective effort, and often with Aboriginal storytelling it is collective. It's not one person going away and writing the story by themselves, which is the Western tradition. Aboriginal storytelling is a collective community a sort of event where stories are passed down. So I actually spoke a lot with grandmothers, with aunties, with my mother, to say, how do you write this word? Like, this is how I would pronounce it. And they would say, no, it's got more of a roll on the tongue, so you need to put these letters in here. So even, still using the English language and trying to fit our words into it. There's some words that there are no English meaning for, and that was difficult even in the glossary. Like, what's the description of that? So I think it's been a learning journey for me. Certainly, I've learnt more, and it's something where children will, in our family and others, will go on to learn more about as well. And I'm hoping that the language will continue. Yes. Certainly that you there may be, so when people talk, it's not exactly English, but it is a form of English. Like, I can go down the street there before, and so there's sort of some words. I went down the street there before. There's some words that are the same and some of that are different. So it may be similar, but depending on the areas where you live, there might be slightly different, sort of nuances in that. What my mum wanted to do in this book was, she said, I don't want a book written in third person. I want people to read this as if they're looking through my eyes. So it was first person that we went with. We tried many different approaches, and so we decided that we would do the first person and in exactly the way she would have spoken as a child. And so there were some phrases or terminologies or wording that she would say, no, I wouldn't have said it like that, I would have said it like this. So, and that's sort of quite contextual as well in that. But if you go, say, to Queensland or to the Northern Territory or even Western Australia, some of that Aboriginal English might be a little bit different. But, generally you can understand it. And if people talk very fast, sometimes it's a bit difficult to understand, but it's also sort of infused with our language as well. And a lot of humour. Just to say that it's been quite a remarkable journey, and I think when we set out, in many ways, I think spiritually a very important journey for my mother and I to go on. It's allowed for us to, you know, centre who we are, centre our language, centre our culture. It's been a very empowering process. It's also been very difficult because it's brought up so much trauma from my mum's past as well, and that's been very, very difficult for her. But I think the approach that's been taken is about taking these stories of trauma from a colonial past and recreating them into stories of survival and liberation, and sharing with others so others can learn from that. And that's one thing that Mum said, I don't care, you know, that the main thing I want, you know, for people to take out of this book is an understanding of what it was like for us, how disempowered we were, how we were on the peripheries. And she said, you know, if people take nothing else away but just a little bit more understanding, then she would be very happy with that. And as it's turned out, it's won the David Unipen Award in Australia, which is an important Indigenous Literature Award. It's been shortlisted for the Commonwealth Book Prize and also longlisted for the Stella Awards as prize as well in Australia, which is a Women's Literature Award. And so the journey that we took, we never imagined that, you know, little Grace would be, you know, sort of ending up in these types of places. And we hear all the time in different countries that people are reading Amazing Grace, and I ring Mum up and I say, oh, you know, I've heard that, you know, Grace has actually gone to, you know, America, or she's in Europe, and so I'll be able to tell her that Grace is in India now as well, and people are sharing her story, and she says, wow, that's great. You know, she never dreamed that her story would travel the world in the way that it has, so very grateful, and it's a wonderful experience. That's a good question. I started with my father's story. My father's Greek, my mum's Aboriginal, and I don't speak Greek. So, you know, my mother has been very strong with our cultural, you know, belief and our language and everything. She's really infused in us a strong sense of identity. And I began to write his story first because he had asked me to, and I had about 50 pages of oral transcript. And I didn't know how to write a novel, so when I went to Adelaide, because I lived in the country, in a sort of rural, small community, I went to the city and I asked some friends, do you know anyone who might be able to take these 50 pages of this writing and turn it into a book? And they said, why don't you enrol in the University of Adelaide creative writing course? And I laughed and I said, I can't do that. And they said, why not? So they marched me over there and got me to sign up, and I got in. So I did a graduate certificate to learn how to write, and then that turned into a master's to finish my dad's story. And then my mum said, hey, I want my story written too. And so I started my PhD. And I think, so from the time of I never knew how to write, from, you know, learning to write to actually finishing the book, I think it was around about, you know, over a period of maybe 7 years. But, and for the PhD, it was sort of extended because I went and got part-time work and then sort of came back to full-time study again, and you know, part-time study. And so I think it was around about 6 years altogether to write the book. So it's been an incredible journey, just an incredible journey. And you know, I'm very pleased that we're able to share it with others now. Yeah, and we've survived it. That's the main thing. We've survived. Yeah.